anyone who does live streams, I really do have a lot of respect for because it's extremely difficult. This is what you have to do. You have to, you could just go on your phone and like hit record or like start streaming and just start talking. But every time that I seem to do that, my audio is crap or um, the camera doesn't have good video or the video doesn't come out really good or anything like that. Um, Plus, I really like working with software. So, kind of setting up my software is a lot of fun. And that's pretty much what I get to do on here. Obviously, every time I come on, something seems to need to be fixed, but that's okay. Um, I've been really trying to think about the zeitgeist a lot because um, I see like our world is going to be different in a few years, like extremely different than what it is right now. Um, and I don't think everybody thinks about it. And I think, you know, it's one of those things that's going to happen so fast that if you actually don't think about it, um, all of a sudden you're going to wake up and you're not going to have a job because you didn't take the time to develop the skills for that job. Um, and, it's not like it hasn't happened historically where there were like depression periods and things like that. I mean, obviously with technology, things would probably be a lot different. And I think a lot of people think like that technology is going to make everything better. Um, I guess it could definitely help. And I think, that's a big thing that I'm trying to encourage people to do is like kind of get into cross domain patterning, really learn AI, and then take it towards the things that you're already doing. Even if you're a blue collar worker, AI is going to be in the trades eventually. Um, and right now, people are only thinking about large language models. However, I think there are a lot of other um, aspects that people could really be thinking about. Um, for example, like robotics. Um, there are already robots that can mow lawns. Some are operated on like controllers and things like that, while some, they're more autonomous. They've had a lot of issues, but I mean, when I was running my construction company and landscape company and I had guys go mow, they ran into a lot of issues. So um, it doesn't mean that they can't improve, right? Um, but that's just one thing that I was generally thinking about. Um, and then, I was starting to think about like my transition back into college because, I always tell people like I don't trust institutions and people kind of question like, why did I go to college? Like everybody kind of questions that. Why did I have a company and then left my company? Um, well, that's going to be something I kind of talk about in here because some of the questions kind of like revolve around that and I'll kind of explain it. So the thing was like, well, I'll start with the question actually that somebody asked. So that way you guys kind of get a gist of where I'm coming from on this. So basically somebody asked me like, how do I actually act when I already understand systems? So basically you're smart. That's what you're saying. You have a good understanding of something. You have some kind of knowledge, right? But you don't actually act on the information that you have. Um, is this a discipline issue or am I missing something deeper? And with this question, like the way that I can best answer it is by sharing my story of how I went from business to going back to school. But there are like a lot of caveats to put onto this because like if we look at like what people say, it's like don't go to college, you're wasting your money. You listen to people in college, they say, oh, like you'll do better if you go to college. Which really, it's only like over the lifetime, you'll only make $300,000 more than somebody who doesn't go to college. And yes, people in trades, um, their pay rate is going up significantly year by year. So I think you'll see a balance there. But what I will say is that sometimes you have to do things to get access to the things that you want. And for me, I was running my company and I started that when I was like 16. It wasn't something I was going to ever plan to do forever. It was just a way to make money when I was a young kid. And I had to work with employees, I had to work with a lot of technology, and that really became what I was most interested in. I loved like getting new equipment and all the software that came with it, skid steers that operated themselves and things like that. Um, I liked working with my employees, like especially like the pedagogical, like learning, like how to move from like mowing lawns to installing pavers, like operating like a tree removal or a total landscape install and things like that. So my two interests like that emerged were psychology, which I got into Jungian typology, and um, and then like technology basically. I realized like I needed to learn programming and coding and all of that, and I started just doing that, and that was really interesting to me. My it was just an extension of my original interest of wanting to get into business, which I knew from a very young age was something I was going to want to do. Um, I basically was running my company, and on any time I had off, I would go take like online classes. I bought a few robotics kits. Um, I was building some really cool things, like things that would organize my files for me, some robotics and all that, like with the kits. Um, yeah, it was pretty awesome, honestly, if I'm being honest. Then after about 2 years of doing that, of learning how to code, I was at this point where there wasn't much resource for me to continue learning. I had things that I could do on my own, kind of. I could do a bunch of different tasks, but it wasn't really like practical. And I would show people, and they'd be like, "What is this for?" Like it's cool that like I built like an eye tracking thing, and like my robots had sensors on them, like my garden sensors and all that, and like it was practical for me, but it wasn't something like as exciting as it was in the beginning, basically. And I realized like, okay, well, I can continue trying to just learn this on my own and probably take forever. And what I see when people do that a lot of times is they end up getting like frustrated or bored, and then they just completely disengage. Um, Either that or they say, okay, I'm going to just commit to like a company or something where they can do it. And then they end up on the lower levels of the company with no real opportunity. And I didn't really want to end up doing that because I had already committed that I wasn't going to work for somebody. I was always going to build my own thing. Plus, I had a good company. So why would I do that? But yes, going to places like OpenAI or Tesla or applying at one of them went through my head. Um, and also, like, I was like, okay, well, there's a bunch of colleges that have like technology programs, whether it's computer science or psychology. The psychology was my other interest that went with this. Um, I thought of like I thought of our behaviors as part of a program, like from our mind, basically, our entire nervous system as I know it now. But I always kind of knew those two would go together. Um, but I wasn't going to go to the bigger colleges because here's the truth: is I was older. There were going to be some young kids who like basically they do deserve to like develop. They deserve the opportunities probably more than older people. I generally think. Um, but even them, like they're going to get like kind of drowned out in a big school where there's 500 kids all going for the same thing. So, and that's why like doing your own thing is the best because then you don't have to worry about all the bureaucracy and hierarchy of that, or you can at least get yourself to the top of the hierarchy, right? Um, so I decided, okay, well, I'm not going to a big company, not going to a big college, but I still want to learn this and I have nowhere to really do that. So took a farther step back and I was like, okay, well, where am I in life? I'm a dad, I have a wife, she has a business, I have a business. Um, I had already kind of knew I was going to be getting out of my business because like I said, it wasn't a forever thing. I made a lot of money on it, like doing six figures a year. Um, but I wanted something now that I was more interested in. I had already helped her establish her company, and we were at a pretty good place, but I wasn't willing to go like across the country to go learn this or move to Texas to go be in that area, which like a lot of people do, but like most people can't do, right? Um, so I sat back, I took that step back and said, okay, where am I really in my life? Like, what are the real limitations that I have? What are any barriers that I have? Um, and where do I really want to end up? And the biggest thing was, I just want to start like really applying this somewhere, be active in my engagement with psychology and programming. And I didn't need to like specify like, oh, I want to go into a certain type of psychology because I kind of realized like the idea is to learn the skills that like apply to research and to building experiments and things like that. So it wasn't really like, oh, I need to go into this department of psychology or anything like that. I need to be in an area where these things are happening and I will have opportunity, right? Because basically, if I didn't do that, I was going to be sitting at my house, like looking at some open source code, maybe make a little app or build a little program and then be done with it. Like I wouldn't be doing anything, and like there would be no way of like getting feedback of like, hey, is this practical? Will it really work? Will other people use it or anything like that, right? So I said, I'm gonna go to a small state school, like, you know, a place where I go to school for free because the state pays all my tuition every semester. I don't go into any debt for doing it. And that's the first benefit. Like, I had a like, young people, they're told to build up this ego, but then that ego is not based in any reality. But like, you don't want to go to college and then not build what you think you're going to build and then end up in a bunch of debt. And because I was older, I was able to really realize that. And pretty much instantly, I realized it was a good decision because I went into a biopsych class and my teacher kind of started talking about her research lab and how they have eye tracking um, equipment and they're working on developing the experiments using it. They do a lot with schizophrenia and autism, so it's pretty deep research. Um, there's a lot of literature review to do, a lot of information to catch up on, things like that. But like I said, I didn't really care what it was as long as I knew like programming and psychology were going to be put together here. So what I did was after hearing her talk about this, I was like, okay, well, if I want any opportunity of doing that, I have to initiate something that's big. I talk about you have to initiate. You can't just wait for opportunities to come to you. I was in this environment where things are happening. And they're not huge things because it's a small state school, which is a research too. So we only get like $5 million in funding. And we're moving to a polytechnic school, which means that they're going to try to do more where you're getting like this hands-on learning with a conceptual understanding. So I approached her and I said, hey, I know you're doing some biopsych kind of research and you have the eye tracking software and I'm really interested in that. Um, I told her like I eventually want to like go for a PhD, even if it's later on, but I want to get some research experiment experience and I'm self-taught in programming and I will build projects for you. She was hesitant at first, I could tell, but then I ended up with an A in her class. And by the end of that semester, she was like, okay, well, you can be in my lab next semester. And I said, okay, like, that's awesome. I got into the lab. We were working on, they were already working on a research study that they were going to be doing. And they had like the questionnaires, which are easy to make, but they had to make an app basically, or a program that would be act as an experiment. And it's called and we do it in Gorilla. Um, it's an experiment builder. And basically they gave me the outline of what the experiment's supposed to be. And I spent about 3 weeks um, making the app in Gorilla. And now I'm actually running the experiment twice a week. I have research participants come in and I give them the assessments, all the questionnaires, then they do the experiment, then they get some candy and then they leave, right? And that's pretty much what it is. Um, but also this semester I was asked to work on bigger projects with more programming and more designing of experiments. And we're also working with other bigger schools, some of those schools that I forfeited and making my decision, realizing like, hey, like I can't afford that school. And because I'm a dad, it doesn't make sense. But now I actually, like we were on Zoom meetings and all that, we're working on other experiments where I'm building the programs. And this kind of brings me back to everything. Like, here's the idea. Like, if you really have this conceptual understanding of something, then that means you have the discipline to learn something. That's probably the biggest thing that you can take on from that. It's like, hey, I don't understand this conceptually because I was being ignorant. I obviously was paying attention. I obviously was trying to figure out how something worked, or at least was able to figure out how something worked. Um, so you have to accept that about yourself and then say, now I need to take that somewhere. That's all this inner and outer thing. If you have this inner perception of how something works, moving to the outer world in some way is the obvious next move. You know, whether it's to actually like execute on it. Maybe I could have, honestly, there were other things I could have done. But because I want my next thing to be bigger than my last thing, I knew I needed more information and a better structure where I'm not going to open a business and spend a lot of time figuring this stuff out because of how fast these types of things move compared to like landscaping. Um, I wanted to make sure that I had like this more solid foundation where it wasn't just iterating through a bunch of failures that were going to take too long to do. I could figure out like what works now and then move that towards iterating through failures that would actually give me feedback that I needed. And that's probably where you are. And it's really hard to take that step back because the truth is I wasn't going to go to college until I was talking to somebody and they said, well, why don't you just go to college for it? And I was like, well, going to college isn't the right thing to do right now. Like, that's not what people are doing. And then I was like, well, why do I think that? Fact is, I believe that, like, probably don't go to college right after high school. That's probably not the best thing to do. But if you have a skill that you're trying to actually learn and you actually have um, this drive towards something and you have a goal and you know what you want to do, then I don't see the problem with going to college actually. I think that's probably the biggest reason that people think college isn't worth it, honestly, is because we were sending kids there that weren't ready. I mean, like I told you, I ran my company from the time I was 16 till I was like 22 or 23. I don't remember exactly the dates, but like I wasn't ready to go to college because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And most people don't know what they want to do. And if there was one thing like I would really push societally, because everything I talk about goes from like problem to like, there we are structured within a society, um, and we are bound by any of what society has us bound by, basically. Um, so you really have to consider those things. Um, and then that's part of like creating your own narrative. Like it wasn't true for me that college wasn't needed. Is true for some people that college isn't going to be anything but a waste of money. But that's not even a thing that's always going to be true. That's true until they recognize what they really want to do. And it's why like it's going to be hard to go from this understanding to deciding where you want to put yourself because maybe you're not like me and you're willing to go work for a company. But maybe you get bored there because you don't get as many opportunities as you get, or maybe you are okay with it. And this is why like I really push and especially like young men because like they're not pushed towards this. Like understand yourself. Like there are constructs that will help you identify like what separates you from somebody else. Um, and then there's also like this idea like your subjective interest. Like what concepts are you picking up on? Because that kind of guides where you should be going, kind of. You know, if the concept is like that you're picking up on when you're like a younger person is like, how does a car work? And maybe that says like where your next thing to go to is like understanding more technically where a car goes. You know, you probably understand conceptually. Okay, there's a person, there's a gas pedal, there's gas, there's wheels, there's a motor, and when the person hits the gas pedal, gas goes to the motor. The motor basically makes the wheels turn. But like, what's the mechanism that opens up inside of the engine that allows the gas to get in there? And does it just dump gas in there, or is there like a certain amount that has to go in every time? That's what getting more technical looks like. Then you can also broaden. And like, so like broadening would be like, okay, I understand. A lot of times with broadening, you have to understand that technical. So like when you think about like, okay, there's a valve in the engine, an exhaust valve and an intake valve. Basically, the intake valve opens, gas goes through the line into the intake valve. There's a cylinder in there, and there's a piston. When the piston comes up and compresses it, there's also a spark, and that creates an explosion. Basically, it's internal combustion. That's what's inside of an engine. And then you could say, okay, well, then so like to expand could be going out into like this is a wide expand, but like how our heart works as like the engine of our body, right? Um, it's opening valves and closing valves so that blood can flow through. I don't know enough about the heart, honestly, to say like what combustion is in there, but you can look at this through hydraulic systems. There's valves in there that allow things to keep moving, and like you have high flow, um, high flow systems and low flow systems. Um, which is the same thing that you see in cars, like a diesel fuel system is like a high pressure system compared to like a gas system, which is more low pressure. Um, so like that's like expanding outwards. And it actually, I think, is a little bit harder than going into the details until you have the details, because then you're going to be seeing the same thing where there's a gap, basically, if you don't have some kind of technical. Um, and these are just ways to expand or refine, because you have options. I think that's the thing. You can expand or you can refine, and you have to understand where you really are, like within the system of developing knowledge or data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. To you have to really define that, like where you are, because that'll kind of set the the trajectory for you. And that's just some things that I wanted to talk about. This is what my live stream is going to look like until people decide to start coming in here. I probably should set a specific day, you know, and like everything I'm talking about has to do with our modern zeitgeist. Like people need to learn how to get to where they want to be, and right now, like conceptually, we can learn anything, but there are like there are walls to getting the resource to learn things at more depth. But conceptually, like you can just go type in on an AI, how does this thing work? You can say, give me an intuitive explanation of how this thing works. And it will give it to you in a way that you can understand, that like a 10-year-old could understand with ease. And then you can dig deeper into that. But I think we're moving more towards this engineering ecosystem where I think we were in like this intellectualizing ecosystem, but then that intellectualizing ecosystem kind of made it where everything's subjective, you know, it's part of the postmodernism, like relative morality and stuff, where like I think a lot of the people who push like this engineering um, ecosystem kind of realize like once everything's like engineered, it's probably we're gonna see that there probably are some things that are true and some things that are not, kind of. Um, and there's not going to be much room for the intellectualizing like sector of things. So if you are one of these people like me who likes to think a lot and like have found ways to apply their thinking, like I think we just have to accept like our society is moving in a different direction. Um, Engineering is what is going to be pushed, and I think more people should be trying to create some kind of like entity, I guess, or like some kind of organization where engineering is the focus. And that goes, everything I talk about is like all like the same. Like how I see it, like if you guys have ever heard of like general intelligence, I think like you can just broadly say like people who take care of themselves and do the things to get themselves where they want to be are also going to know more in the world and then are going to do more in the world. It's why like I have a hard time just talking about one thing, um, because you exist within the system, and the more of the system that you know, more about yourself within that system that you know, the better the better chance of finding and capturing the opportunities you have. Um, and I don't think it's as difficult as we make it out to be. It's like, you know, what I explained today was basically how to engineer your thinking and your education, and development, like all in one. Like you have to think, you have to want something, want to learn something, want to know something, believe something. You have to put yourself in the environment to know what you know and what you don't know. And that's pretty much where you're going to get to.